Good evening, everybody. We've got still got a couple minutes before we'll start, and some folks are still logging on. Patty, you've got a alias going on with your name tag.
That was my work account.
Good evening, good people.
Hey, Jimmy.
Good evening, everyone.
All right, 5 o'clock. Start the recording. Yeah, everybody, welcome to meeting number 24. As per usual, these meetings are being recorded and live streamed. And please use the raise hand feature to help prevent crosstalk. And other than that, Sean, please take it away.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 5:01 p.m. Everybody. Really quick, before we get started with roll call, I'd like to welcome the newly appointed Tigard High Black Student Union representative. I hope I don't pronounce this wrong. It's Elise Butera. Did I get that right?
Yes, you pronounced her, Elise Butera.
Okay, well, anyways, why don't you introduce yourself and just kind of let us know a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Elise, your sound isn't really coming through. It looks like you're unmuted, but you might want to just be a little closer to the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, my Chromebook's I'm using my school Chromebook. But my name's Elise Butera. I am a senior this year at Tigard High School. I'm the vice president of the Black Student Union, but ASB president, Associated Student Body president at Tigard High School. And yeah, no, I was reached out to by a few different people to join this, and Abdi, who was part of it last year, I believe, also told me that this would be a cool thing for me to be a part of. So yeah, just very involved in the school. I do choir as well and did volleyball for a bit. So yeah, very excited to work with all of you guys.
Nice to meet you and welcome. Okay, let's do roll call. Kim, do you want to do that?
Yes, Commander McDonald.
Here.
Officer Nunn.
Yep.
Shelby Rahala.
Here.
Michael O'Brien.
Here.
Elise Butera.
Here.
Emilio Calderon won't be joining us. Liz Newton.
Here.
John Trin. Jimmy Brown.
Here.
Lee Landers. Patty Lofgren.
I'm here.
Justin Lowe.
Here.
Danny Rauda.
Here.
Valerie Sasaki. Sean Stoldryer.
Here.
Nick Jarmer.
Here, thank you.
And Jeff Mott.
Here.
And that is roll, Sean.
Okay. I'd like to invite everyone here to join me in a centering our conversation tonight. First, I will read a statement, then I will ask you to join me in a breathing exercise to help bring focus and thoughtfulness to our conversations of today. Today, we convene to listen and learn from each other through reflection and discussion. As we reevaluate and improve our public safety practices, we'll elevate the voices and experiences of the communities who have been and continue to be disproportionately impacted by equitable systems. We thank all those who have advocated and worked on dismantling injustices in Tigard and our broader community. We build off of their efforts to create more equitable and just outcomes for people of all backgrounds and abilities. Now we will do a breathing exercise together. You may turn off your camera for this portion. Close your eyes or gaze softly downward. Feel the chair under your legs. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out your mouth. Feel your hands in your lap. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out your mouth. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out your mouth. Slowly open your eyes and begin to breathe normally. Thank you all for participating and creating space with me. Okay. All right. Next, Danny, are you here today?
Yeah.
Danny, sorry to spring this on. Do you want to talk real quick about our update to the city council? And Eduardo, you might have comments also. I thought it went very well.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of my main takeaway, was positive experience. It helped me kind of really take the time to reflect on how much ground we've covered. And it was actually kind of hard to sum that up in a limited amount of time.
Yeah, we had about 20 minutes. I think we covered everything, and I welcome anybody to watch that if you haven't already. Reach out to myself or Eduardo or Danny if you have any questions. Okay, let's proceed into public comment. Did we have any public?
Well, real quick, Patty has her hand up.
I have to say, oh, am I unmuted? I have to say I attended that city council meeting, and after waiting hours and hours and hours till you finally got your time, it was much later than advertised. I thought you did an excellent job. I thought you really represented us well. So thank you both. That was just awesome.
Thank you. Okay, did we have any public comment today?
Oh, sorry, Eduardo's not on this meeting. No, there was no public comment.
I didn't see anything either. Okay, tonight no community members have joined us to speak. Public comments are vital to the board's mission, and we welcome community feedback on our work. If you have comments for the board, written testimony must be submitted by 4:30 p.m. the day of the scheduled meeting. If you'd like to speak at our meeting, please email our staff at eduardo.tigard-or.gov. Okay, next, I'm going to turn it over to the chief for the chief's update on talk about professional standards for the sergeant and PSAB recommendations update. So go ahead, Chief.
Thanks, Sean. And before I start into that, I too want to just thank both of you for your report out. Sometimes, when we do this every day, day in and day out, this can be taxing. And sometimes it was just nice to hear the things that you guys have learned and seeing it through your eyes as a representation of this board. And it just validates to me why we're here and the good work that the board is doing. So just my hat's off to all of you again for your commitment. Elise, just want to welcome you as the police chief. Again, this is a safe space, and I can't emphasize enough that we really want to hear from our youth. And I know you're coming into this midstream, so myself or the commander, we will make ourselves available if you need to get caught up on, it might be terminology, it might be the backstory. We just want to make ourselves available so that you kind of understand, because I would get that you might hesitate because you're not sure, you don't want to slow things down. So again, just want to make this a very welcoming space for you, and we're glad to see you. And then for my update, as mentioned, for the last year, we have been doing what I call a proof of concept with a professional standards sergeant. We're just about the size where you should have an internal affairs, or in this case, a professional standards sergeant that will do internal affairs investigations, but also we're trying to bridge our use of force reports and work with our trainers, as you guys have all been aware of this now, and looking for training opportunities. Sergeant Fox was in that role. He promoted to lieutenant, and we went ahead and filled it, even though it's still not funded. We're still using it on vacancy savings. And Sergeant Prater, as you guys all know very well now, had applied and was selected for the position. We've met with the city manager to present this concept for the upcoming budget, fiscal year 2023. And I thought that it would be really nice in everything that we're trying to do is if this board felt that this was in alignment with our transparency and accountability. And if you felt that as a board, you could support this position. Now, I know you don't know the totality of all of the budget, but that letter would probably accompany our presentation to the budget committee and really speak to what we are trying to do. I know you got sent the job description. I don't need anything tonight, but if that's something the board would like to either discuss or vote or whatever appropriate, I'll turn it over to Kim and we can do that at that time. And the other thing I just wanted to acknowledge, so we have 3 recommendations from the board that have come to me. And we have it scheduled for Wednesday to meet with my internal team on what that will look like. I did present it to the city manager in our pre-fiscal year 2023 budget proposal. It is my hope to perhaps absorb most of this, because not knowing what else you guys are going to recommend, I'll see if I can absorb it and even get it started this year. So I hope to come back in our next meeting with a plan on those 3 recommendations. I might come back with a little bit of a tweak, but by and large, I expect to take these recommendations wholly and implement it as you guys intended. So that's it for my update.
Thanks, Chief. And touching back on the professional standards sergeant, if anybody, I know it only got sent out on Friday, so you may not have had a chance to really dig into it, but if anybody has any questions about that role this evening, now would be a good time to get those answered, and then we'll continue to have the next period to review until our next meeting, and then I'd like to set aside some time at our next meeting to talk about it more in depth and maybe vote on a recommendation if that's what the board chooses. And Valerie, please.
So Chief, what is your timeline on action related to this, this new position proposal funding?
So it is filled by Sergeant Prater, and so it's still through my vacancies, because
Right.
it'll take so I'm good for this year. We'll probably formally start meeting with the budget committee in that April timeframe. So if we have that letter before we meet officially, again, we've presented this to the city manager, so the ball is moving. But yeah, if we in the next certainly when we meet in January will be plenty of time.
Okay, great, thank you.
You bet.
And Jeff, please.
Thank you. I read through the note from Friday, and there's a couple of things I think are really great with the position, especially around internal investigation. Having one person doing all the investigation, that consistency that you spoke of, is great, and minimizing like direct superiors doing their internal investigations of their own people is also great. One question I had is around what happens to those investigations after they're complete. I know California has a state law that makes internal investigations basically public record. Oregon doesn't at the moment, but I just wanted to throw that on the table as we talk more about, transparency, within the department and then to the broader community. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or comments.
You're absolutely right. There is nothing, and I don't intend to make them public. However, if it's egregious enough and it goes where their certification is in jeopardy, then, and I sit on that board, if you recall, but those are public information. They'll just say, Officer A, they won't identify the agency, but they do talk about what the circumstances were if they were to lose their certification, whether it's 3, 10, or indefinitely. So when it gets to that level and the most egregious, other than that, the rest of them are internal, and they could be suspensions and things of that nature. Now, DPSST will be starting to take on some of the suspensions, so we may see more of that. And so the lower tier ones are just within the department. There's been no movement statewide to make those more public.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. And Commander.
Yeah, I was just going to follow on with what the chief said, Jeff. So the chief mentioned that there's a new reporting requirement that the chief has actually under House Bill 3145, that if there's an economic sanction found as a part of the internal investigation, that the agency is required to notify DPSST, the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. So that is new. And so that's something that we would be as an agency required to do. So it isn't a full, making the investigation public, but it's a new check to internal investigations, and also to it's one of those things to try and keep a record of officers that may be problem officers that might try and jump from one agency to another, and there will be more of a clearinghouse at the state level for that. So that's something that we as an agency will be picking up, as the chief mentioned, with additional requirements to report to the state.
Any other questions about the sergeant position? Jimmy.
Good evening, Sergeant Prater. And congratulations on your successful application process. So I just have a quick question regarding the SRO contract. So as I understand it, you are responsible for getting that implemented. And in that process, there's obviously the school district and the different schools inside the district. What are some of the expectations that you're looking at through that contract?
I'll take that one, Jared.
Okay.
Okay. So since Jared's so brand new to that, he probably, I'll give him the credit that he's probably read through the contract. But one of the things that we started doing, in probably July of last year, so July of 2020, is we started working with the district on a pretty comprehensive process to review the SRO program as a whole. And then really went out with a community engagement process with the school district at the lead. They had some facilitators that the city helped with bringing together so we could go out to the community and talk about what they wanted the SRO program to look like. So what we do as a department, and we're really clear on, and since Jared doesn't even really start in his new role until the 3rd of January, it kind of falls to me right now because Monty got promoted to lieutenant last week. And then, so I kind of don't have I've got no professional standard sergeant. Well, that isn't true. I'm giving Jared plenty of work to do in that role already. But what we do then is, and the supervisor, the sergeant specifically for the SROs, is he'll be making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to not only our part of the contract, but we are also bringing it to the attention of the school district regularly, especially at the school level, to say, hey, there's certain things that we need to meet together on, that we need to, there's certain benchmarks we need to hit. So a lot of that comes down to training, like learning how the school does certain things, learning the language that the school speaks, because all of us in our different professions have like nuanced languages that we speak, right? So we'll say certain things and people might look at us like, what did they just say? And so making sure that we're on the same page with all of that, and that we're hitting all the benchmarks that we've set forth. So meeting with different student groups in the schools, meeting with staff and parents. There's a whole bunch of different benchmarks within the contract that we work on to make sure that we hit those. And those are things that were agreed on mutually within, whether it's the district, whether it was the cities of Tigard and Tualatin, which, because we have two different cities, it makes it a little bit different dynamic. And then people in the community. So all of that together was what helped draw up this contract. And it's actually pretty unique in the process that we did. So Jared will have plenty of things to keep track of in that role as well. But the reality is, Jimmy, the SROs themselves are actually probably the best gatekeepers of that, because they really stay on top of it. And they're like, hey, Commander, the contract says this, and we need to make sure that we follow through on this. And usually it has something to do with getting together with the school district or the schools themselves on some level of training. So
just one quick follow-up, and this is, of course, relating to current events. And I'm not sure if it's a district policy or if it's a practice that the SRO would be involved in. But let's just say that we have a situation at one of the schools where there is a known threat. Student is interviewed, student has a backpack, student is in the office. And again, this may be a district policy issue that I'm talking about. I'm not exactly sure. On the assumption that young person might be, quote, detained, is that young person's possessions available for inspection? Yeah, that may be the question.
Yeah, maybe Nick can pop in here, because Nick is actually yeah, thank you, Nick. Go ahead.
So in a situation like that, it kind of depends. A lot of times it is brought to the school's attention before it's brought to an SRO. In a situation, the school, my office is right in the main office, is right down from the principal and the assistant principal. So a lot of times they would bring me into a situation like that. But yeah, if in a situation like what you're referring to, where they believe there could be a weapon, or there's the possibility or a statement has been made that there would be a weapon, actually, typically it is the school, the security, that would conduct a search, unless there is a crime. But those would typically be done by the security and not the SRO. If a weapon is found, then it's going to be brought to our attention. But in those situations, typically the security or principal or vice principal is conducting the searches.
Okay.
And then,
thanks, Nick.
Yep. And then to go back to the last question about the district and, our contract, something new this year too is we're meeting with district, certain individuals. Each meeting we're meeting with somebody different, but we're meeting with the district office now once a month. In fact, Sergeant Prater got to attend that first meeting last week. But every month now we're meeting with the district office and going over stuff. This last week it was HR was there, and we were talking about investigations and stuff. So we're meeting with the district now once a month. So that's new.
Thank you, Officer. All right, Sean, I'm going to turn over to you to introduce the next section of our agenda.
Thank you, Kim. Next on our agenda, we're going to debrief and have a discussion about the laser shot training. I've been asked to warn the public some of the events we might talk about might be uncomfortable, triggering. I will say that I was surprised how it was very realistic. It was the actors, even though they were just TV, they were life size. They were not what I expected. They did not do what I expected. I got shot once, and it definitely got my adrenaline going and my blood pumping. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim to lead this discussion.
Yeah, I'm actually going to call on Jared to discuss a little bit for not everybody in this room had the opportunity to do the laser shot training. And of course, we have members of the public who are joining us. So Jared, if you wouldn't mind introducing and telling us a little bit about the training, and then also talking about the 4 scenarios that everybody went through to lead off our discussion.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. First of all, let me say that to those of you that did come through the training and experience that for yourselves, I am truly grateful for you doing that. Not only that you were able to have that experience, but it also helps me as an instructor ultimately. And I get to go through it and instruct people that aren't your typical police officers, whether it be a new recruit or whether it be a 20-year veteran. So it was very, very beneficial to me as well. So very quickly, I had 4 scenarios that I picked out for all different kinds of reasons. And those of you that went through it will remember them. Scenario number 1 was a drunk guy up in a tree where some homeowners were calling and wanting that person gone. Scenario number 2 was a domestic violence call that ultimately played out with a gun being pulled and forced the person going through the training into a deadly force situation. And let me go back and talk about each one of these just a little bit. The drunk guy in the tree, that was one that my reasoning was it runs very, very quickly. And it was one that I could branch off at the end of the scenario so that if the person attending the training was doing a good job at least trying to talk to the person, trying to figure out what the person was going through, what they needed, what they could do for that person now, and at least trying to get that dialogue opened up, it would end in that person basically giving up. If the person going through the training got stuck in a loop or wasn't making it clear that they were talking to that person, not so much trying to de-escalate the situation, but trying to take steps towards solving what was going on without escalating that situation. If it wasn't clear that they were doing that, then that person would have attacked them physically. So I wanted to have one to be able to articulate, yes, the person going through the training was at least trying to talk, trying to engage the person in conversation, which pretty much everybody did. So that one for most people, or I think for all people, ended in the person giving up and saying, all right, take me to jail. I've been there before. The second one, the domestic with the gun, number 1, I chose it because, again, it runs very, very quickly. But number 2, I chose it because it's a very distinct decision. There's not a whole lot of decision there when you really get into the meat and potatoes of the scenario. It's only going to end one way, and it escalates pretty quickly as soon as you get inside the apartment and are faced with this female that is ultimately very, very upset and really doesn't want you there. It is one of those scenarios that for watching officers go through it, it's one of those no-brainers, right? That she's doing what she's doing. there's no choice in this matter. So I wanted a scenario that was very cut and dried, that really there was only one choice in that one. The third one was a domestic inside of an apartment. And ultimately, it's not a deadly force situation, but you're forced to make a decision in using some type of force because the suspect or the bad actor ultimately attacks you with a frying pan. But there's some other things at play, like you have a countertop between you and the person coming at you with the frying pan. They're exhibiting some behavior that are pretty telltale signs. We talk about pre-attack indicators, and I wanted people to really pay attention to body language and pick up on those pre-attack indicators, just as the domestic before. The actor in the domestic with the frying pan really telegraphs quite a bit. And then the fourth one was a person with mental crisis, who was in mental crisis or in having a behavioral health interview, seated on a bench. And while there may not have been a crime necessarily relatively visible when you first encountered this person, the encounter goes downhill pretty quick. I chose this one again because it doesn't take a lot of time to run, but it throws some different dynamics in there. In other words, this person, number one, is seated on a bench. Number two, it's readily apparent that this person does not want you there in the language that they're using toward you, but they are in a populated area. And then number three, you're not faced with a firearm, but it does wind up becoming a deadly force situation. You're faced with an edged weapon and a person charging you with an edged weapon. And I wanted the person to go through the training to have to recognize that and make the decision of what they were going to do and at what point it became a deadly force situation for them. And you know, that's all different points for all different people, right? There's some people that would tell you, well, I had places to go in that, and I could have backed up, and I could have done this and that and the other. There's other people that will tell you, she was pretty close to me, and as soon as that edge weapon came out, that was a deadly force situation. I felt that my life was in danger. I felt that the innocent bystander's life was in danger, and because of that reason, I knew that deadly force was authorized, and I knew that I was bound to stop that threat. So, but I wanted there to be a little bit of a decision-making process in there. So those were the scenarios. Those were the reasons overall that the scenarios were chosen. What I didn't realize in choosing those scenarios, because I was looking for ones, like I said, that were very cut and dried, that would require a decision and require a decision very, very quickly. What I didn't realize is that the bad actors in 3 out of the 4 of those scenarios were all female. And that actually has a fortunate byproduct, because if you look at it by and large, rightfully or not rightfully so, or maybe some of our own biases come out, for whatever reason, females are viewed by a lot of people as not as much of a threat to somebody as males are. And so the byproduct of those scenarios is teaching us that anybody really can be a threat, whether it's a female, whether it's a 14-year-old child, right? Anybody can be a threat, and we're concentrating on the behavior that they're exhibiting and not necessarily who they are. In other words, they're displaying behavior that we need to get to stop. And it doesn't necessarily matter their age, their gender, their race, anything like that. What matters is we need to stop that behavior. And so that was kind of a byproduct of those scenarios.
Thank you for that run through. I think it at least refresh everybody's memories. So for this discussion, we're going to go into a couple of breakout rooms. One will have the commander, one will have Jared. And then I just have a couple of discussion questions as a jumping off point. Certainly don't need to limit your conversation to these questions, but just some things to start getting you thinking and talking to one another. So first one is what surprised you the most during that training? What insights did you gain about policing, either in general or policing in Tigard from the training? And then was there anything that you learned about yourself while completing the laser shot scenarios? Take a quick screenshot, or Tammy and I will also be in the rooms.
And I have a copy of the presentation too.
Thanks, Tammy. Any questions before we go into the breakout rooms? Great. We'll spend about 20 minutes in there, but I'll pop around and make sure that that's about the right amount of time, and then we'll come back to the group. Welcome back. I think there's still another 40 seconds or so on the clock for the other group.
Based on what Sergeant Prater was talking about just before we ended with the type of research that was there, it really tells me that we really do need a larger training facility, because my sense is in certain situations, officers are not going to go into an environment by themselves. So they're going to be going in with someone else. And so if all of them are trained in the manner that Sergeant was talking about, in that first 7 seconds, so to speak, you want them to be able to be in consort with each other as opposed to operating against each other, whether that's on the who's giving the commands or who's placed where in the situation. You need space to be able to train in that manner. So again, I just want to weigh in on what I think is the importance of having a up-to-date, state-of-the-art environment to enhance the type of training that our officers are going to receive. I believe that our city is only going to get bigger. We're going to continue to need to have, better training, more up-to-date training, utilization of different types of technologies, and strategies to work with the public in non-threatening kinds of environments and in those that are threatening kind of environments. If it's a facility that allows a mental health therapist to come in and talk about working with individuals that are in distress, then we need that facility. I don't know. I'm assuming there are. I don't know for sure, but I would guess that there are simulations where you see individuals who are in some type of emotional or mental health crisis, and that type of training should be available as well. And I would think that a state-of-the-art facility might be available for that.
Thank you, Jimmy. And Commander, please.
I just, Jimmy, hearing you say that brings to mind, we're in the process of working towards looking at some new technology that will give us an opportunity to have the officer placed in a situation where they will have to experience trying to maybe de-escalate a scenario. But more importantly, it's going to give the opportunity for the officer then to see the other side and maybe to be that person that's actually in crisis and then see what the response may be to them. So the technology is still developing, but the concept is there. So being able to place officers maybe into the other side of that, what we feel will help to provide that different perspective for the officer, so that maybe having that experience may give them some additional tools when they have to deal with someone that may be experiencing something in a similar way. So we're in the process of looking at some of that now. The technology is developing. It's, it maybe isn't as great as we'd like to see yet, but we're going to continue down that road because it's important that we explore those. Of course, like everything, it's not cheap. So we have to keep that in mind as well. But there's new stuff coming along that's going to help us in those areas.
Thank you, Commander. Valerie?
Yeah, I just want to sort of tag on Jimmy's comment, because I think it may not be quite clear the context that his comment arose within. And we were talking in the other session when we had the breakout room. One of the things that we were talking about was the training, the physical plant of the training facility itself. And some of the challenges that presents when you're trying to have a coordinated training exercise, and looking ahead to where Tigard is growing, and where we are now and where we're likely to be in 10, 15, 20 years. And, what does that look like from a resources perspective? And what does that look like from a simulation perspective? Because I think all of us really came out of this exercise with the feeling that it was very valuable, and that it really helped clarify things, at least for me, helped clarify things that were not readily apparent when we were talking about some of the other more classroom type trainings that we've discussed. So Jimmy, is that a fair characterization?
Thank you so much. Yes, that's exactly where I was going with this.
Thank you, Jimmy and Valerie. And as we wrap up this conversation, does anyone have any last thoughts on the laser shot training?
Well, from our group, we just had some very interesting conversations. I just want to kind of go through briefly. The thing that surprised most people was how fast things happened, how we felt as individuals sort of ambushed, and how many decisions there were to make in a split second. But I think something we all agreed on was how incredibly thorough the preparation was prior to us having the scenarios, and how detailed the post-processing, the debriefing was, both in terms of what we did and what we didn't do, and what we noticed and what we didn't notice. So Sergeant Prater, did you notice this? No. Did you notice this? No. And so we were just very surprised at what an effective educational coaching experience this created for us to, as officers, to refine and continue refining our practice. And I think that one of our participants mentioned what they noticed was how much they didn't notice after processing the experience. And we just thought that this, in terms of what we learned about policing in Tigard, that just this is incredibly valuable in terms of ongoing ability to learn best communication types, what particular scenarios required what communication types. And somebody just mentioned that it brought forth to them what a tough job our officers are faced with every day.
Thank you, Patty. That's a really good place to end our conversation around the laser shot training. Thank you, everyone who participated and for this conversation this evening, and Sergeant for your time. And Sean.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Discussion. Next, we're going to talk about some old business. We have a continued conversation about the final use of force recommendations, and a last point that was being edited by board member Jimmy Brown. Kim, you want to go ahead and lead this?
Hi, Sergeant. Yes, I will.
I think Sergeant Prater's leaving us. Thank you.
So where we left our conversation was there was a recommendation around use of force reporting, frequency, and format thereof. And the conversation was getting, I think, a little bit stuck on some of the finer details. So one of the things that, and you can take it or leave it, that we did in some of our behind the scenes prep meetings was take another run at that recommendation, maybe slimming it down so that way it could go to the police and it could kind of continue that conversation. So I'm going to share that version now. I'm going to reiterate, take it or leave it, but it is an option. So to read it, we recommend that the Tigard Police Department consider more frequently making public its use of force data. More frequent data releases could assist the community in monitoring use of force incidents in Tigard and increase transparency between the department and the community. The TPD should consider the format and timing of more frequent releases and report back to the PSAB or another appropriate body. If you like to just raise your hand to comment, I can also pull up the previous version. Jeff, please.
Thank you. I don't think the language needs to change. I just wanted to mention it's not only transparency with the public for quote unquote monitoring use of force incidents. It's also like a validation of how well the police department works with the public, because I'm looking at force response statistics from the Tigard website, and 0.1% of interactions result in use of force. So this more frequent reporting can also be a validation saying, hey, look, we're doing our job managing these interactions without having to resort to using force.
Thank you for adding that nuance, Jeff. And Valerie.
So can you put up the prior language, please, Kim?
Yes.
So I will say that there are things that I like about this language better than the proposed language. And what I like about this is I like the specificity of this language as opposed to the other language. The other language is very squishy and very aspirational with no actual ask. So, I am hesitant to say that, the other language is acceptable. I don't find it acceptable. I want time periods and I want action steps. But, as an intermediate course of action, we could ask the police department to examine this issue and report back to us within perhaps a few months. And at which point, I think we need to have a discussion about specific metrics. Because what I like about this is that it has actual periods and, asks, whereas the other one, if you could put the other one back up again, I think is just a little bit too squishy.
Thank you, Valerie.
It stops short of saying it would be nice if they would do this, but.
And Sean, please.
I don't think anything on this proposal needs to change. I just did want to just quickly recap. I was reading a PBS article. It came out in July 23rd, 2020, and roughly 60 million police civilian encounters in the US each year. About 1.8% involve use of force. And then if we look at our city of Tigard statistics, we had 2021, we had total contacts and encounters 35,151. And then a use of force was 0.13%. So less than 1/10 of the national average. So if that data is correct, then overall, it seems like our police department is doing something right. I think that should be recognized. Another thing, just some background as I understand it, and anybody please correct me if I missed something, but there was a national legislation or executive order where we're reporting use of force in the manner that we're reporting it on an annual basis. And then the state of Oregon passed legislation that also mandates that we report this data on an annual basis. So as I see it, this is just my opinion, but as I see it, right now, everybody, all the agencies in Oregon are comparing apples to apples data, which is a good thing. And we will contribute. There's only a 40% participation rates in police agencies across the country. So Oregon passing this legislation, even though we don't contribute to the overall population of the U.S. the way states like California and Texas do, we will be contributing to that participation nationally of use of force data being collected. So, anyways, I don't know that any of that changes this rendition of the proposal, but I just wanted to point some stuff out there, and happy to discuss if anybody has any comments.
Thank you, Sean. And Valerie.
Yeah, so thank you, Sean, for highlighting the national statistics and the information that you were able to find. I think that's useful and interesting. However, I don't know that it's relevant to this discussion, because I think what we were concerned about is the way that the information that was presented to us when we were talking about use of force as a group, where it appeared that there was a disparate impact on the BIPOC community, and specifically African-American men, because there was a greater instance of use of force incidents involving African-American men than there is in the Tigard population in general. So I think that gets to how the information is presented and some of the statistics that we are concerned about, because obviously Tigard Police Department is going to be compliant with the state mandate and the new legislation. So, I think what we are looking for here is, yes, additional monitoring, additional, as Jeff was saying, endorsement of the good job that Tigard Police Department is doing, but for information to be presented in a way that is more useful when we're trying to figure out, the mandate of this organization is to look at our committee is to look at disparate impact on the BIPOC community of Tigard policing practices. And so, my concern is that if we stick with the current format of data and we don't configure it, we won't understand how that disparate impact plays out. And if in fact, as the person who presented it to us was saying, if the cause of that is because these instances don't involve people who actually live or work in Tigard, that they may be people who are passing through Tigard on a like a TriMet bus or something like that. So, so I think that when we're looking at the data, that's why this committee is addressing this recommendation. And I think that that's something that's lost in the current language that's on the screen before us. May see, and I think that if you look at the third bullet point here, where you're talking about contextualized information, I think that's really what we were trying to get to when we were having the initial discussions about this. So, I think the national discussion is important, and that a broader discussion of use of force in general is important. I think, we're really concerned about context and making sure the information is presented in a useful way.
Thank you, Valerie. And then Jimmy, and then Sean.
Valerie, well stated as usual. And folks, I have to say that this isn't about whether or not the department is doing something right or wrong. This isn't a right or wrong issue. And it's not really one of about a quantitative issue. 0.1% from a quantitative measurement, yes, that can downplay the significance of something that really is a qualitative issue. It's how do people feel? How does that 0.1% feel if they're a person of color and they have been subjected to use of force by Tigard Police Department? Whether or not they live in Tigard or are passing through Tigard is really, it's really a red herring. The issue is, I have been subjected to something that I don't feel comfortable with, and I have a network of folks and friends who may feel that their ability to go into Tigard is limited by virtue of the experiences that I've had. And I'm not saying me personally, I'm just using that as an example. So it's not, we can't just simply fall down on the side of, well, 0.1% of all use of force data suggests that it's really not that big of an issue. It is an issue. And as a person of color, it is definitely an issue, whether it is 10 people or 100 people, because those 10 people have voices and are worthy of having some information as to why is this happening to me or to people who look like me. And with all the good deeds that the 35,000 incidences may show, that 0.1% may be the part that really makes people feel uncomfortable in having to deal with policing authorities in this particular area. And who knows, it may cause someone to go, I know that if I get pulled over by this police officer, they're gonna want to look in my trunk, they're gonna want to do this. Maybe I have a misdemeanor warrant, I don't want that. And then that leads to something else. And so I think we want to be able to, when we look at the two examples, I want the contextualized information relating to race and ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and mental health at the time of the incident, if known. I want that information because it helps to elucidate what is happening in the field by the officers without necessarily saying it's a right thing or a wrong thing. So.
Thank you, Jimmy. And Sean, please.
Jimmy, your lived experiences are beautifully stated. I agree with everything you just said. Thank you for sharing that. I would love to deal with the root cause issues and remedy stuff. I mean, the economic situation, number of living wage jobs, wage stagnation, overcrowded and tough circumstances in our schools, tough circumstances in families, access to medical and mental health services. I mean, these are all huge issues. Access to safe family housing. These are huge issues impacting our community. It's impacting some people more than others, and that is not, we need to do something about that. But we know we can't cover all that in the scope. What needs to happen can't be, we're not charged with that scope. I wish we were.
Thank you, Sean. Valerie, you have your hand up, but you also had raised a plan of action. So I was going to open the floor to you for either making a motion or discussing further. Go ahead.
I don't quite understand what Sean's last comment was. Were you asking for us to do something in particular, Sean?
No, I was just making some observations, Valerie. I don't think we have it in our scope to dive down that rabbit hole. Sorry if I didn't make that clear.
Yeah, I mean, because I respectfully, I disagree, because I think within the scope of our charge is to try and help develop the information that will allow City Council, the mayor's office, the police department to make decisions about disparate impact on policing. I mean, I think that's specifically within our charge. Do you disagree with that?
I think the things we would need to do would need to be done in Salem at a state legislature level. I don't know that the city of Tigard has the authority to, address the root cause issues.
Okay, so what I would like to propose is, I think that the slide that is in front of us is a useful action plan. And to the extent that Tigard the police department wants to take these bullet points that we're asking them to look at and come back to us in 2 months or 3 months with this will work or this won't work, or here's additional data that we can't capture or we can capture. I think what we're asking for is feasibility on collecting these data and presenting it in a way that is actually useful for the people in Tigard who are charged with supervising the police department and evaluating whether there is a disparate impact. And I think without the ability to look at contextualized data, you can't even begin to have that discussion. So, I would recommend that we, and perhaps move, that we make the recommendations on the slide ahead of us. I don't like the other recommendations. I think they're too squishy and I don't think they accomplish anything. So I think we need specific, measurable, actionable items, and perhaps we could add in a timeline on in that line, Tigard Police Department should review the following and report back to the PSAB or other appropriate body. We could add back within 2 months from the date that this group has this discussion. Is there any discussion, Liz?
Yeah, I have been kind of quiet because I'm kind of wearing 3 hats here.
Sure.
And I agree with, I tend to lean more towards this, because we start with saying that we recommend the police department review the feasibility. And this is the suggestion we're making. And I do think we need to have some metrics. So I do agree with this, and I would hope that the department could come back maybe within 2 or 3 months and say, well, we can make this work, but this is a little more challenging. So we're providing some direction, asking them to review the feasibility and then get back to the PSAB. So I'm talking as a counselor, community member, PSAB member, and that's why I was a little reluctant to speak at first. But I think for me, the key point is this is what we think would be the most helpful for all the players, transparency, the community, and the department in terms of that reporting. And we are asking the department to review the feasibility. So if they can get back to the PSAB and say, this works, this doesn't, but we hear department hears what the PSAB is saying about some metrics. So my long way of saying I would prefer language along this line for the reasons I stated.
We do have a motion on the table still to bring this to a vote, but I will call on Jimmy first.
Oh, I was going to second the motion, and I'm assuming the motion is on the information that is currently on the screen.
Yes, it is currently on the recommendation that is on the screen that was edited by you, Jimmy, and then was discussed at the last meeting and discussed again tonight.
Okay. Yes, I would second the motion to accept the recommendation that we are looking at on the screen.
Great. So we're going to go to a vote, and then just as a reminder, in addition to your vote of yes or no, you may also add additional context and information. Valerie.
I was just going to say, do we want to have additional discussion about these 3 points? We could just have everybody discuss it along with their vote, but if people feel strongly that this shouldn't be or that this should be, it might make more sense to get it out.
Okay, and I think Nick has raised his hand with an additional comment.
Yeah, on the third bullet point, I think we addressed this, or we talked about it a little bit in the last meeting. We already keep track of race, ethnicity, gender. The problem that I see is the social economic status. And how do you determine somebody's, if we use force on somebody, that we then have to turn around and ask them, what do you consider your social economic status? Mm-hmm. How do we keep track of that? That's not something as police officers we keep track of. You're now asking us kind of to start keeping track of that. How do we determine that?
That's a good point, and I think Valerie raised her hand to address that.
No, I think that's very valid, and I think what people were thinking with that socioeconomic status was actually housed and unhoused status. But I think the feasibility question, is it possible? I think that's, Officer Nunn, I think that's where your comments are going to, is that you think there may be some feasibility concerns. And that's really what we're asking, is to try and noodle out, what does this data look like? So with that caveat, I think that's makes sense to me.
Thank you, Valerie. And Commander.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around, this is really prescriptive. And my concern is that we dial down so tightly the data that we almost, with the data that we would be providing this prescriptively, you could almost identify exactly which use of force was used on a person if we're doing it on a quarterly basis. And I think that we're trying to avoid, especially if we're talking about anonymizing data, if we're being so prescriptive as to get down to, like in point number 3, those specifics with the number that we have on an annual basis, if we're reporting quarterly, we're going to get that information could be probably pretty easily figured out just by somebody who wanted to do public records requests for reports that we do. So my concern is not only with the transparency and the, trying to make sure that we're being accountable to the community, but also that we're respecting the people that that need to have some privacy in this. I'm concerned that it's too prescriptive is what I'm looking at. And like Nick said, we do collect most of that information in our current force data reviews. So most of that's there. I do think the socioeconomic status is a really challenging one, because are we going to rely on the officer's observation? And I mean, I look at these, is it feasible? I mean, it's feasible for us to look into anything, right? That's part of what we do is we examine ourselves and review our practices, on a regular basis. So is it feasible to look into these things? Sure. I guess my question I would put back to the community would be, is it responsible of the police department to be collecting certain information on individuals or groups, right? Because there are certain things that as community members, we expect the police department to do, and there's certain things we expect them not to do. And one of the protected, protected status or protected class in Oregon now is your houselessness or your, whether you're housed, right? So we have to be very careful about how we document those types of things, right? So anyway, I just wanted to voice just some of my thoughts as I'm looking at this and trying to make sure that we as the police department can appropriately navigate what the community's expectations are when it comes to reporting this back to the community. Recognizing that we do report, we do a full report annually. That's something that we do annually, and then we report use of force to the FBI's use of force database every month, right? And we've been doing that since its inception as well. Since it came online in January of 2019, we were one of the first in Oregon. As Sean, to your point, Oregon is, I think, at about 97%, maybe higher. The goal was to have 100% compliance by the end of this calendar year. So we're very, very close as a state. So anyway.
Thank you, Commander. And Jimmy.
Okay, let me get rid of my little raised hand. So I think, I don't know. I'd say I can't remember over my career how many documents I've wordsmithed. I will say that we don't want to get caught up in the details at this point. Really, what we're asking at this point is for the department simply to review the feasibility. That's one of the most important phrases in this descriptor. Review the feasibility of providing X. And then we are giving you some of what X might be. It might be more up-to-date use of force data for a certain period. It might be a cost-benefit analysis. It might be the feasibility of providing certain types of contextualized information, race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status. My sense is, if you do the feasibility and as command staff sit down and with your research people or your information people and say, can we get this? The question then to be asked is, how could we get it? And from that, you can then determine whether or not it's feasible to get 9 out of 10 pieces, 10 out of 10 pieces, or 6 out of 10 pieces. You then bring that information back to the PSAB and say, this is what we've come up with. We believe it's feasible to give you the cost-benefit analysis of bringing this forward. It's going to cost X. We believe that we can get race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status. We might not be, but we do keep information on where our detained folks reside. We ask the question, what's your address? You don't have an address. Are you houseless? Are you homeless? Are you living with your relative? So some of that information is there. Then the question is, do you have the ability to get that information out and provide it back to this group? That's what this is really asking for. And yes, it is somewhat prescriptive, but that's just in terms of saying to you, is it feasible? And I think that's a broader discussion inside of the department amongst command staff and their research folks saying, well, folks, the PSAB is asking us this. Is it possible? And lastly, I would say, I see this really no different than city council during budget sessions asking the chief and department management to justify why we should spend $174,000 on the position that we're looking at. It's very similar to that. It's a feasibility question. Is it reasonable for us to have this? Possibly. Then explain to us why, and then come back to us.
Thank you, Jimmy. And Chief, please.
Okay, for the ease of this discussion, should the vote pass, I completely understand what you're asking for and I have no problems with, if we can have a vote tonight and it passes, it'll be on the recommendation for us to discuss tomorrow when we discuss the others. So I hear crystal clear what you guys are asking for, and it's not lost in translation. So I got it.
Thank you, Chief. And Jeff.
Thanks. I just have a clarifying question to kind of get back out of the details of the discussion. Like right now we have a yearly use of force report. So if we take what's on this page and take out the 4 times a year, how different would the report be versus the one we put out once a year? You know, because maybe the work
He was having some internet connectivity issues earlier as well.
wherever you get it. So how different would the collection of this data be versus what already exists, besides the timing?
I think that's what I'll get back to you on, the feasibility, the timing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we actually ended up catching.
Anyone? No. Shit.
Sean, we heard you. Excuse me, Jeff, we heard you.
Yeah, I think we're gonna disconnect and reconnect. We'll catch him up on that. We all heard him. He swore on YouTube. Officer Nunn?
Yeah, maybe we discussed this and I don't remember. Where did we come up with quarterly reporting as opposed to, we went from yearly reporting to quarterly? How did we come up with quarterly instead of, every 6 months? I'm just wondering, I'm thinking back, I can't think of how we came up with quarterly.
In my recollection, quarterly was, we never went to 6 months. We always went straight to quarterly. I don't remember who made that suggestion though.
I made that suggestion, Kim.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Officer Nunn, the reason that it was suggested to move to a more frequent period was because there was some concern that, having the information aggregated and only presented once a year didn't give the police department enough time to be nimble when it came to addressing concerns about disparate impact. And so, what I think was proposed here as a compromise solution, because, clearly there are not that many instances that occur, was to do a 12-month rolling average on the data, but presented on a quarterly basis. And the folks that we had talked with early on in this discussion process said that that's doable. Now, again, we're only asking for feasibility here. So that's where that came from.
It's just going back to Commander McDonald's, we don't have that many uses of force. And if you're doing it quarterly, that's going to, like you said, you can pinpoint those. So I'm just thinking, if we're going from yearly, is it more feasible to go to 6 months? And then if we're finding data, then we can go back down to try quarterly. But you're going from once every 12 months to once every, what, 3 months? So that's quite a jump if we go
Yeah,
back down to
And I
6.
think Commander McDonald had raised the point that there was a concern about privacy. And so my expectation is that council will weigh in on whether there's some sort of protections on privacy that this would be violative of. So, I mean, what we're asking for is that the department take a look at whether this is possible. Or we're proposing that we ask the department to do, because I think we're still in our discussion on this motion.
We are. Thank you, Officer and Valerie. Officer Dunn, did you have anything else to add? Okay. And Sean, please.
Maybe I missed something. I thought that's really what this discussion boiled down to, is baseline what we were doing this. I thought we were doing this proposal currently only on a yearly basis, 12 months. And we're seeking to change the policy to quarterly reporting. So I guess my request would be that the city evaluate this information and let us know if they're currently collecting this, and if they're currently collecting and publishing this information on an annual basis. That would certainly help me understand this better.
Commander, you are collecting and releasing this information on an annual basis, is that correct?
Yeah, most of the information that's included in like the bullet point number 3 is included in our, when we report annually. Yes.
Thank you. Sean, does that answer your question?
I think so. I think that was Jeff's question too, but we may have lost Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. That's basically what I was saying. Like, I don't think what the department does now wouldn't be that different to what the department would do. It's just the timing and how many per year. To the point about privacy, I mean, not to minimize how intense and important a use of force interaction is, but if someone wanted to do the research looking at public records requests, they could basically figure out on a yearly basis who the use of forces are happening to, because there's, we're looking at somewhere in the 40s for the calendar year 2020. If you aggregate still on a 12-month period, it's still at a pretty aggregate level where there might be more privacy.
Thank you, Jeff. And John, please.
I just want to comment in terms of the reporting period. I mean, I appreciate that there's not a lot of use of force information or frequency, but I'm okay with the recommendation that's presented by Valerie. It's just going to be no information that's presented this quarter if that's the case. I'd like to go ahead and ask that we move to a vote.
Yep, so moved. We'll start again. Is it seconded?
I'll second that we move this to a vote and close discussion.
All right. So we're moving to vote. Again, you can add extra context to your yes or no. And first up, Commander McDonald.
I will vote no. And I think it's too prescriptive, and that the 12-month reporting period is effective and appropriate.
Officer Nunn.
I'm a no as well, for the same reasons Commander McDonald addressed.
Shelby Paula.
I'm also a no for the same reasons. I think the chief indicated she has the guidance, and I think that the proposal offered tonight was a better, it gave more flexibility to the department to meet the community's needs and the department's needs. So I would vote no on this one.
Michael O'Brien.
Yes, I'm almost persuaded that it's not feasible, but I think a little more information would be useful before we reach that conclusion.
Elise Butera.
Sorry, so I vote yes if I agree. I either have to vote yes or no in this scenario, or in this situation.
Yes.
I agree with what Judge O'Brien says, where I feel like I would need more information coming in. Is that okay, or?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Liz Newton.
Yeah, I'm going to vote yes because I'm thinking about the feasibility. I perfectly respect that the department may come back and say this isn't feasible, this proposal. But I think what I'm hearing from the PSAB members is we're looking at a way to, for the not as much the transparency, but that nimbleness. And so if there's another way to get to that, which I think is the value that the PSAB is trying to get to, and the department comes up with that, then it may look different. So I'm along the lines with the judge and Elise that I think it's important to review the feasibility, but the department may come back with something different for us to discuss.
Thank you. John Trin.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, for that comment. I vote yes. I think the information is valuable. And not all that we talk about feasibility, which is the big question, and we could talk more about that. But that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Jimmy Brown.
I am voting yes. Again, I believe that what we're asking the department is to essentially tell us that, is this feasible or is it not feasible? What parts of it can we get and which parts can we not? And I would want that to happen based on the department having a full discussion inside of its management and administrative team.
Thank you. And Patty Lofgren.
Yes, I'm going to vote yes, based on the fact that this is asking about feasibility and that I have a great deal of respect for what the department is going to come back with.
Thank you. And Danny Rauda.
I'll vote yes as well. And similar to Judge, I feel like I'm slightly being persuaded that what I'm hearing is that it's not feasible, but at the same time, there's kind of mixed messaging there from what Chief said. So I also want to echo what Jimmy commented, that I think it's just a matter of just take a look at it and have a more intentional, more comprehensive conversation about it.
And Valerie Sasaki.
I'll vote yes, and I think I've probably talked enough on this tonight.
And Sean Stoldrer.
I'll vote no, and I also think I've talked about this enough tonight.
As everyone's aware, it is a 75% required yes in order to achieve consensus. We have 12 members here this evening and 4 no votes. So that takes us right to the 75. No, that's one below the 75% required to pass. So this recommendation will not move forward.
I had a question. Since I'm not sure if my vote counted for a yes or a no, but like listening to other people, is that allowed for me to put my vote in or no?
You put in your vote as a yes vote.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Yep. Thank you, Elise. Well, that also brings us to time this evening. So Sean, if you'd like to wrap us up. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, the chief just raised her hand for a quick comment.
Yeah, we put the voting status in here for a reason. But again, I hear you guys loud and clear. I'm going to have an internal discussion. We're going to, I'll report back a little bit more on what we can do. It's something we already do. It's just we're talking frequency. So again, I'll just say I hear you, and let me take a look at it.
Thank you, Chief. Sean, please.
As a naysayer, I feel it important that I add that I do think that the city should review the information quarterly internally. I've said that before, and I think that information is there and would be a great tool. So thank you for that, Chief, and I would certainly encourage that direction. Okay, with that, we are close on time. We've We overran our allotted time for that discussion. Unfortunately, we are not going to have time to discuss current events and how they affect Tigard. So hopefully we can carve out a little bit more time next meeting for that discussion. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I second.
Okay. Any further discussion or opposition? Okay, hearing none, our meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night. See you all in January. Have a good holiday season.